My name is Luke Ryan, and this was my path to becoming an Army Ranger. When most people think of just a typical Army Ranger, they're probably thinking of an enlisted infantry ranger, and that's what I was, and that's the path I'm going to describe. Like anything else in the Army, becoming a Ranger starts with basic training. Basic training is where you learn all the basics of being in the Army. You learn how to march around, you learn rank structure, you kind of learn the culture, you learn how to handle weapons at a kind of basic level. Some people call it boot camp, just basic for short. It's where you got drill sergeants running around yelling at you, making you do a bazillion push-ups and all sorts of other crazy stuff. I spent a lot of time out in the field. Most people will go to basic training and then go to AIT, Advanced Individual Training. That's where you kind of learn your job of the military. But a lot of people like me who were infantry rangers, which is kind of the vast majority of rangers, those people will go through what's called OSUT, One Station Unit Training. And that's kind of a combined basic training with AIT all into one school that they make. Just because you get so many infantry people coming through, they just made them all into one school. You learn these sort of fundamental Army skills, and once you're done with that, you head off to Airborne School. Airborne School is where you learn how to jump out of planes. It's static line jumping, it's not free fall, so you've got a line connected to the plane, so you don't have to really pull anything. You just jump out. If you've seen Band of Brothers, or any other kind of World War II movies where a bunch of guys are all just jumping out of the side of a plane together, that's what it is. So in basic, everything is kind of locked down. Your comms to the outside world are very limited. Getting a letter from your family is like a godsend. But when you get to Airborne School, it's completely different. You're exposed to the Army at large. You feel a lot more free finally after all this time in basic training. You've got your phone, you can call people, you can run around. You're not just around other basic trainees. A lot of people going through Airborne School are new and just out of basic, but a lot of people are from their career military guys who just got a chance to go to Airborne School now. So it kind of exposes you to this larger world. Upon completing Airborne School, then you head off to RASP. Now that used to be called RIP, and this is where you really start to actually enter the Ranger world, because until then you're completely outside of it. RASP is a selection course where they try to weed everybody out and see who is worthy to go on to the 75th Ranger Regiment. They start with just like running you from Airborne to RASP because it's on the same base, and they just crush you. They crush you for like a month. They're basically trying to put a lot of physical and psychological stress on you to see who can handle it, because that's exactly what you're going to have to do when you're in Ranger Battalion, especially when you're on deployments. So the whole intent is to just weed people out and see who's going to make it. And a lot of people quit. The amount of people who quit can fluctuate. It depends a lot on the people. It depends a lot on the cadre. It depends a lot on a whole bunch of different factors. But for my class, for example, we had almost 80 people start from Airborne, and 25 of us made it through RASP. So the first half of RASP is basically just seeing how bad you really want to be there. The second half is a lot of that flavor. It's still that environment, but they're teaching you a lot of the fundamentals to be a ranger. You get way more advanced marksmanship training, vehicle training, basic fast rope training, basic explosives training, things like that you didn't get in basic training or Airborne School. By the time you get to the second half of RASP, most of those guys are going to stick around. On my class, by the second half, if I remember right, I don't think anybody actually quit. I think there were a couple honor violations and maybe somebody who got somebody hurt their back, but that was kind of it. So once you finish RASP, you're feeling kind of on top of the world. Everything's great. You get your tan beret, which is the classic kind of designator of being a ranger. You get assigned to one of 3 Ranger battalions. First Ranger Battalion is in Savannah, Georgia. Second Ranger Battalion is up in Washington State, Fort Lewis. And then Third Ranger Battalion is Fort Benning, Georgia. A lot of people have preferences as to which battalion they want to go to, but believe me, when you actually get there and you get with those guys and you get integrated into whatever platoon you get integrated into, you really can't imagine going anywhere else. It becomes so fundamental to kind of your career in the military that, the people you meet, it would be weird to think of going anywhere else. Now you're assigned to a Ranger Battalion, right? You get assigned to a platoon. Now you actually finally get to start your job. You live in your house, you show up to work, and you train all the time. So when you get to Ranger Battalion, you're kind of feeling on top of the world because you just passed RASP, kind of feel like a badass and stuff. And then you get there and you realize all these guys have already done that. It's kind of not a big deal at all to them. And you're definitely the new guy and you know it. And it's kind of a very difficult time for new guys, but you got to prove yourself. During this period, it's usually, this isn't a term that they use in Ranger Battalion, but I like to use it for purposes of describing it, like a probationary period almost, where you are the new guy. That can last anywhere between 7 months to a year and a half or whatever. When they deem you ready, when they think that you're finally ready to go, they'll send you to Ranger School, which is a separate school from RASP, but we'll get into that here in a minute. So you're a new guy in Ranger Battalion. You show up to work in the morning and you usually go home at night unless you have overnight training. The hours are insane. There's a ton of night training. There's a ton of early mornings. I think my alarm was set for like 4:45 in the morning for a couple years. These schools that you've attended up to this point, OSA, Airborne School, RASP, you feel like you've learned a lot from them. But when you actually get into Ranger Battalion, that's when you seriously start to learn a lot. Doing the training events that they do, sinking your teeth into that whole world, that whole lifestyle, because it is a lifestyle, you start to really learn stuff. Back when I was in Ranger Battalion, we were in the middle of the war in Afghanistan, and we were doing about 7-month training cycles and 3 to 4 month deployments back to back. That's just your life. And when you're a new guy, you enter at the beginning of one of those training cycles. And when they deem you ready, then they'll send you to Ranger School. Ranger School is a bit confusing for some people because you would assume like I go to Ranger School and I'm a Ranger, right? But I've just described this whole pipeline where, you become a Ranger through all of these other schools that have nothing to do with Ranger School. So Ranger School itself is a separate Army school. It's not actually run by the Ranger Regiment. It's like the Army's premier leadership school. Every Ranger has to go through it in order to become a leader in Ranger Battalion. Like RASP, there's a high attrition rate. Ranger School is just over 60 days long if you don't recycle. The first 2 phases are in Georgia, and then the third phase is in Florida. Every phase, as you complete it, you run the risk of recycling it, which means you have to redo that phase. Every once in a while, you'll get somebody with a day 1 recycle, so you could be almost all the way through it, and if you mess something up or do something wrong, if they think that maybe you're worth trying again, they might vote that you just get a day 1 recycle. I got lucky and went straight through all 3 phases. Sometimes it's luck, sometimes it's somebody, like I didn't get injured. I could have, gotten seriously injured and had to recycle or even gotten dropped. With my class, I think we had around 300 people start and like 100 some people graduate. So, roughly a third for my class. Everyone takes turns being an official leader in the platoon. They strip off all their rank. You have no rank in Ranger School. You take turns being in different leadership positions in a platoon. And that's the whole school. And you get graded based on when you are one of those leaders, how well do you perform? You're sleep deprived, food deprived, you're all messed up. Pretty much every phase has like a instruction portion and then like a field portion. And of course, a lot of people just quit as well, like in RASP. When you're in Ranger School, there's, most people around you aren't actually in the Ranger Regiment. A ton of people in the Army go there because, it's one of the most respected schools in the military. It's the premier leadership school of the Army. Like a ton of officers go there, a ton of people who feel like they've really like sunk their teeth into their military career. They've been in for like 10 years and they're ready to give it a go. So when you finish Ranger School and you get back to the 75th Ranger Regiment, you don't feel like a new guy anymore. You've really started to get some traction in your career. You can become a junior leader. You have a lot more latitude in Ranger Battalion to do what you want to do with your career. You also are much more comfortable in your day-to-day life there. You're no longer the new guy. You feel like you kind of fit in a lot more. From then on out, it's training cycles and deployments and the occasional school that you can go to. You can really get to learn some pretty awesome stuff. And And then you get to deployments, and every deployment looks different. And certainly any deployment outside of Afghanistan is going to be way different than an Afghanistan deployment. I mean, my deployments look something like this. You go there for about 4 months. You just start doing missions. You switch your sleep cycle. You're sleeping through the day and you're working at night for the most part. And you would wake up and have breakfast / dinner because it's like 6 p.m. And then you would see if you had a mission for the day. And this is kind of oversimplified, but if not, you might do some training. You might just hang out. You definitely, a lot of guys work out like a ton on deployments, play video games. I did a lot of writing because I'm a writing nerd. You are sitting in the central area. You wake up, you find out if you have a mission, you go out. A lot of missions can be 5, 6, 7 hours long. I've been on missions that have been up to 30 hours long. The typical mission would basically look like, you're going after a bad guy, some Taliban commander or something. You show up to wherever it is that he's at, his house or wherever he's staying, you grab him, and then you throw him on the helicopter and you head home. It's pretty simple. And they either fight back or they don't. If they do, most firefights are going to be, 10 seconds long. They're not these long extended extravaganzas. They can be, but they're typically not. And then that's it. You go home. Granted, these are all pretty big generalizations. No two missions are the same, and things can get very complicated. One big part of being a ranger is being a really good problem solver. So when these totally unforeseen circumstances get slapped in your face, you use all of your training. And a big part of that training is how to overcome situations that you haven't been faced with before with these fundamental tools that will help you overcome that. Depending on where you are in Afghanistan, it might be easier or harder to talk to your family. And it just depends on the nature of where you're at, where you're staying and living. I wasn't a ranger for 20 years or anything. I did my stint in the military and I got out. My experience in the military became an incredible foundation for the rest of my life. I mean, a lot of guys can kind of lean on that, like the old glory days, a little bit too much, but it's extremely useful insofar as it influences your everyday life now. So for me, transitioning out of the military, one of the most valuable things that I did was figure out how to apply the intangible things about that I learned from Ranger Battalion, the work ethic, the discipline, the toughness, the problem solving. That kind of stuff is just absolutely invaluable if you can apply it to the civilian world correctly. And that's not a given. Nobody forces you to do that. And that's pretty much the building blocks of what it takes to become an Army Ranger and what it's like when you're there.